You know, when we think about oil wells, we probably think a lot about Texas, Oklahoma, maybe Alaska. Right now, we're standing on top of the first billion-dollar oil field in the United States, right here in northern Pennsylvania. Come on along, we're going to check out the Penn-Brad Oil Museum and get that story. In 1871, about 12 years after Edwin Drake drilled that first well in Titusville, production started here in Bradford Sands Deposit. We're at Bradford, Pennsylvania, and we're going to go catch that story. The area here was so prolific in its production that by 1881, about 83% of the oil produced and used in the country came out of the Bradford Sands.
Anyway, oil was discovered here in the Bradford field in 1865. And you may or may not know, or you probably do, that oil was discovered, period, in Titusville, PA in 1859. So once they discovered oil there, everybody in this part of Pennsylvania was looking for oil too. And we were drilling here as early as 1861. However, we didn't have any information other than the depth of the wells in Titusville, and their wells, turns out, were much shallower than ours. So we took about 6 years before we finally drilled down deep enough to hit the oil. We're here in Bradford in the valley. If you're going to drill a well right here at our feet, it would be down 1,100 or so feet. So once they hit the oil here, then it was game on. Our boom started, and the little movie you just watched, you heard him say we had 90,000 wells in this field. Well, that was in an area that was roughly 21 square miles. You got to picture 90,000 wells in 21 square miles. That's a lot of holes in the ground. That averages out to a well roughly every 200 feet, give or take. So you really can't throw a rock around here without hitting an old well. And once our oil boom started, it was like a gold rush. Our population went from around 600 people in a sleepy little lumber town in decline to about 42,000 and some change in a very short amount of time. At the peak of our boom, we were supplying 83% of the United States oil and almost 80% of the world's oil out of this little field. And it wasn't just the quantity that we had here, we had the quality. We had a paraffin-based oil which was superior to the asphalt-based oil that you find in most of the rest of the country. You know, Black Gold, Texas tea. And the paraffin-based oil, you get more oil per barrel when you refine it, you get more byproducts out of it, and it's a better lubricant. The War Department knew the quality of the oil here in the Bradford field, and during World War II, they wrote the specifications for the tanks and the planes, so the oil almost had to come out of this field. And the oil men here, their contribution was to stay here and make oil. So most of them had a forced deferment where they had to stay here and make oil. Towards the end of the war, they loosened that up a little because they were looking for men. Our refinery here in Bradford happens to be the oldest continuously operated oil refinery in the world. It was the Kendall refinery for most of its duration. You probably heard of Kendall. It's been going since 1881 and it never stopped. It's still producing local oil, even though they sold the name off about 25 years ago. One of our less impressive claims to fame, you could say, our local McDonald's restaurant here actually is the only McDonald's in the country that has an active oil well in the middle of the drive-thru. And it's one of the first wells that was drilled within the city limits of Bradford. It was drilled in the early 1870s and still making oil today. There's a lot of local jokes about the French fries and the oil and all that stuff.
Hey, if you haven't already, click that subscribe button and help us hit our goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We would really appreciate it.
This displays a working model of an oil field powerhouse. And these came about out of efficiency, we'll say, or cost effectiveness, because in the early days, the oil companies had one man at each oil well with a boiler and steam engine, and that worked pretty good for a while until they got up into the thousands of wells, and it cost too much for the oil companies to leave one man at each well. So this powerhouse system came about. I have an aerial photo here. I don't know if you can see it on your camera. That's the building in the middle. It had a big horizontal natural gas engine, what they call a hit and miss engine, some people do. And it ran a mechanism that pulled all these steel rods. All these lines that went out went to a different well. This allowed one man to pump about 30 wells through his shift during the day. And this is a working model. It's pretty representative of how they worked, and it's got some sound effects with it. So I'll turn it on for you. You're kind of focused on it there. That's what they sounded like. You got a picture of dozens and dozens of those running with all that sound on the hills around it. You focus on these little check valves, that's how the oil is brought up from way down on the bottom. Call them oil slippers and top posts.
In case you were wondering what 90,000 wells looks like, as Fran told us earlier, the deposit here was about 21 square miles. This map, every dot is a well, and it represents approximately a half mile by a mile, so roughly a half a square mile. That's how densely packed they were here in the Bradford Sands deposit.
And a barrel of oil happens to come in a quantity, or doesn't come in a quantity, but it's sold, bought and sold in quantities that you and I can't buy. We can go buy a 55-gallon drum of oil or a 30-gallon drum of oil, but oil is still bought and sold in the quantity of 42 gallons. And that goes way back to the earliest days of oil in the Titusville field, more than here, because the only way they had to ship oil to market was in a whiskey barrel. And a whiskey barrel held 45 gallons. But they figured by the time it went in this teamster's wagon and his barge down the river, some was going to spill or seep out, so they allowed 42 gallons to market. And that's where it all started, and that's still how it's bought and sold on the commodities market these days. This is kind of the centerpiece of our museum, and what it is an early steam-powered horse-drawn fire engine. It's not really in here because of what it is, but because of the role it played in local oil history. So in the early days of Bradford Oil, the only refineries that existed were way out on the East Coast: Bayonne, New Jersey, New York City, Philadelphia, and all the oil had to ship, usually by rail, and usually on a rail car that John D. Rockefeller owned, out to his refineries and get refined and then ship all the way back here. So that would have been from the mid-1860s maybe up to the late 1870s. This was the case. So of course Rockefeller, nobody liked him here. He tried to get his foot in the door. Nobody would sell any oil property here. He eventually came in through the back door with Pennzoil, which was one of his companies. But in the early days, he had the monopoly. So the man that owned this piece here was named Lewis Emery Jr., and he was one of our more prominent oilmen. He got his start in the Titusville field. He knew all the ins and outs of oil, and he didn't like Rockefeller either. So basically, long story short, he rallied all the local oilmen. They all chipped in some money. They more or less formed a union, and Emery had what was a radical idea at the time. He was going to run a long-distance, high-volume pipeline around Rockefeller's railroads and ship the oil himself, which was a radical idea in the 1870s. There were small local pipelines, but there weren't any big pipelines. So all the men chipped their money in. They went out and bought up a right-of-way, and I've heard that there was even a rumor that floated that Emery was going to build a railroad to throw Rockefeller off the track. I'm not 100% sure if that's true, no pun intended, but anyway, eventually Rockefeller figured out what Emery was up to because they were laying a big pipe. And there was a spot out mid-state somewhere, I can't tell you exactly where that was without researching it, maybe around Williamsport, where Emery had to cross under Rockefeller's last railroad at a trestle location. So of course Rockefeller knew he was coming, and he dispatched a team of big burly guys on his payroll down there to stop Emery at any cost. So what they did was they took a steam locomotive down there and they parked it on this trestle, and they waited for Emery and his crew to get there, laying the pipeline. Pretty soon Emery came along, and they were ordered to start throwing hot coals from the boiler of that locomotive down on Emery's crew to stop them. And they did, which was pretty dirty pool, but that's the way it worked back then. So Emery was pretty frustrated. He was pretty desperate, and he was a smart guy, and he thought on his feet. So he had the idea to take this old Silsby steam-powered horse-drawn fire engine out to the site, and they hooked up hoses to the steam turbine pump, and they were firing live steam back on Rockefeller's team. And they had a physical battle to get this pipeline through. And the punchline of this whole story is our man Emery prevailed.
Right now we're standing in front of a 1920s era company house that would have been occupied by some of the oil field workers. Let's take a look in. They said the front and back are open. So we want to take a walk through here. Little cook stove, porcelain table. My daughter would be jealous. Sink, washing machine, wooden barreled no less. Candling going on. Wood stove in the corner. High-tech phone.
this is an old steam engine that would have been in the back of the rig in the early days. So before internal combustion came along, everything was powered by steam. And about 1895 or so, they started getting away from steam because they had to pull the boilers through the woods, and they weighed 8 tons, and if they couldn't find gas to fire them, they had to fire them with coal, and they froze in the winter. So when engines came along that could run off natural gas from the well, they ran the engines directly on natural gas. And they slowly replaced, not slowly, it was a pretty quick transition, but the first natural gas engines were steam engines that were converted. And down on the other end of the building here, you'll see an old engine, and that's one of those half-breed engines. It started out as a steam engine, was converted into gas, and then it evolved into this one. This is an early model electric jack. Had a chain drive, and it had a couple different cams in there. You could change the stroke of the jack depending on how far you wanted it to travel.
Now it would have been skidded in, I'm assuming, from
yeah,
the base.
Well, yeah, and when you bought the jack from the oil supply company, it was just the smaller part without the boat. They call that the boat. Eventually, they were all put on things like this, because even if they were hauled out to the site on a flatbed truck, they still had to be drugged by a tractor or something out to the well site. So some of them were anchored to railroad ties and things, but most of them were on a boat like this. So we're pretty proud of this unit. This is one of the few surviving nitroglycerin horse and buggy setups that we know of. And
using that term "surviving" with nitro
well,
is
yeah. So obviously, you already were kind of informed earlier that this one drop of this would blow your head off. So this is a 10-quart can, which was a standard way to store and haul this nitroglycerin. This 10-quart can, if I dropped it, was full of nitro, would destroy this museum and everything within 1/8 of a mile out here. And this guy's sitting on 16 of these cans going down these rough dirt roads with these steel wheels on this buggy.
Yeah.
And of course, if there was a rock in the grass he didn't see or a hole, it was goodbye. And there's several hollows around here that are named Glycerin Hollow because there's still a 40-foot crater in the ground where this buggy blew up. And if he blew up, unfortunately the horses couldn't get away. So they were you couldn't really tell where the horse ended and the guy began when they went out in search of woods for his remains to bury. Usually they'd find a vertebrae or a thumb, they'd bury him in a cigar box. That was what was left of him. And it wasn't just a jolt that would set this off, a static spark left over in the air from a thunderstorm. If it sat in the sun too long, the umbrella here is not for the driver, it's for the nitroglycerin. If you poured this too fast and it went glug, 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 like your milk. Sometimes they didn't even know it set it off. Sometimes these cans would leak and it would get down between the leaf springs on the buggy and the friction would set it off. So this was a dangerous job. These guys were called shooters, and they handled everything regarding the nitro. They had a winch on the back of the buggy, and they would lower the torpedo down into the well. They would fill the torpedo. They had a line to measure the depth where it was going to go. And they'd go out in the morning to a bunker in the woods and load up, and they'd go down this route to different wells and shoot. And if everything went well, then they made it home that night. The old saying was that there was old shooters and bold shooters, but there weren't any old bold shooters. You know?
50th anniversary here at the museum. They dedicated this mural, which traces the history of oil in Bradford from the 1870s through to about the 1930s, in the boom years of oil here in northern Pennsylvania. And hope you've enjoyed this little look back at the museum here, the Penn-Brad Oil Museum. We're just a little bit south of Bradford, Pennsylvania. I guess it's what, Custer City?
Yep, Custer City.
Custer City, right along US 219. You can't miss it if you're coming into town. And Fran, I would like to thank you for your hospitality today and for some great information for everybody to enjoy out there.
Thank you, Bud. It was very nice to meet you. And I'd like to invite everybody to come up and see our little museum. We've been here 52 years. We have a big event the last Saturday in July every year called Derrick Day. It's kind of our customer appreciation open house day, and we have a lot of stuff going on here. So if you're a little ways away and you're looking for a good excuse to come up, that's always a good day to come. But we're here early April through Halloween every year is our regular season. Right now our days open are Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. That may be expanded when we find another local historian that would like to do what we do here. But anyway, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to seeing this video myself.
Okay, Brian, again, thanks. And thank you all for watching. And till the next time, have a great week.